Hey, welcome back to another Grumpy Gunsmith episode. Today I'm going to show you how to do a wrist inlay, at least the way I do it. I've got a gun here I've been working on, an early Virginia gun. This is my personal gun here, and you can see, well, it's hard to see, there's a silver inlay in the wrist. This one is a bit tarnished now, but it's put in, of course, inlaid in, and in this particular case I made two silver nails that go in, and the tops were hammered over into countersinks, and I also used a little bit of glue underneath too to make sure it kind of stays in place over time. They had high glue back then to help with that aspect, but a lot of these I see there's no glue underneath them. They were just held in by the nails, and through the shrinking and swelling of the wood over time, a lot of those began to start to work their way out. So I'm going to show you how I do this. I've got one started, and we'll kind of catch you up on what I've done so far. So hang on just a second. Let me flip the camera around so you can see what's going on. Alright, so what I've done is I've made an inlay from a piece of sheet brass. This is about 50 thousandths thick. I like something a little thick so it's easier to inlet deep enough so that it won't be popping up in time, and it'll hold the nail or screws, whatever you use, in tighter. Now the way you make this is, once you decide on a pattern, get you a piece of cardboard. This is just thin poster board, and I folded it in half, and I've drawn the half of what I want there, and then when I cut this out with a pair of scissors or X-Acto knife, you know, some sort of sharp knife, and open it up, then I've got the pattern. And you can paste this or trace around it on a piece of brass, cut it out, and I use a jeweler saw to cut out the pieces so I get a pretty close finish, and then I will use needle files to finish off the edges, making them nice and smooth. The next thing that you do is anneal the brass, heat it up to a cherry red, quench it in water, which makes it nice and soft, and then you need to find something that has about the same radius as the wrist of your gun to hammer this down into to get the basic shape. And there's a number of things you can use. Piece of pipe, you can hammer down over top of the pipe, clamping the ends even if you want to as you go along. I've got a swage block for my anvil that has different radiuses on it, so I use that. But basically you just want to kind of pre-form it. You'll do more forming of it after you get it put on the wood preliminary wise. And the way you do that is draw your center line for your inlay. Kind of ignore this brown, that's just a preliminary stain on the carving I was doing so I could see exactly what it was going to look like when I was finished. But I've drawn a center line and positioned this in place, and I've gone ahead and drilled two holes. I'm going to actually use screws to hold mine down, and I've got some fully threaded, very small screws that are fully threaded that I use to hold this in place. And with that screwed down nice and tight to the wood, I can go ahead and scribe around the piece with a sharp scribe, and I'll also mark it with a pencil too over top of the scribe line. But that'll go down into that line that you've created and won't be rubbed or erased off so easily. And you can also, at this point when it's tightened down to the wood, go ahead and take a hammer and lightly tap around the edges, and that'll help get that final shape that you want to get it close to the wood. Then when you pull it off, of course, now you get the fun part of stabbing around the outside and inletting it. And as with all things that you're going to inlet, stab to the inside, take out all your waste in there, and then slowly work your way back up to that scribed line. And I'm not going to show you all that because it's just kind of boring. You've seen some of that in some of the other work I've done, such as inletting the butt plate on this gun. So I'm going to go ahead and get this inlet, and if there's run into anything I think you'll need to know about, I'll let you know. So hang on, I'll be right back. Alright, just wanted to update you a little bit. I've gone ahead and stabbed around the outside of this, keeping to the inside of my marked lines, and I was able to do it all pretty much with 2 chisels, one gouge and one flat chisel. Now I'm going to go in and start taking away the excess and working up to my stabbed lines, and we'll see how it looks from there. And I like to start at the top and work my way down. Of course, the grain is going this way, so you want to work that way as well. The only time you'll go against the grain is to get up into the top corners up here, but you can get a lot of it this way, going downhill. Yeah, doing this is pretty much just a matter of patience. Take it down a little bit at a time, but you want to try and keep the depth the same until you get down to the thickness of the material that you're inletting. So that's pretty much what you're doing, and just keep going, and just being careful when you're driving it forward and you've got an arc like this. Make sure you stop before you have gone too far, and then sometimes I'll just kind of peel it up. That way I'll make sure I don't go beyond my stab mark. Alright, so I'm going to continue on with this, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like when I've got it pretty well done, and we'll see how close I get before I start having to widen it out to fill the inlet. Okay, I've got it pretty close down to the depth that I want. Now it's a matter of just bringing it out to the scribed lines, and the best way to do that is find chisels, gouges in this case, that you can lay it right in that scribed line. If you drag it across the wood, you'll feel it hit into that scribed line you did, and just stab down. And I like to use a little bit smaller, narrower gouge to do this, so that, if I need to, I can shift it slightly to follow the angle of the incised line I put in there with the scribe. come back with a small straight chisel and just stab in underneath, and you can peel that right out. Now this area right here on the wide part here, it's going to be one area where you're probably going to need to bring that out a little bit more as the inlay goes down, because if you can imagine that side there is actually, the width is going to end up wider because that curved section is going down now further than the thickness of the metal. It's actually going to go down. So when I scribed that line, I tried to keep my scribe straight up and down so that it would kind of give me that extra width that I need. But I always find out that I have to kind of take it a little bit further to get that piece down in there where I want it to be. So the idea is just keep on going around, stabbing on that incised line you scribed in there and taking away that excess. And you can kind of lay the inlay on there from time to time too and kind of check how your progress is going. But always when you put it in there, put the screws in and tighten it down so that you know you're not going to end up shifting side to side or up and down. taps around the edges. And this will help give me an impression of where the edge of the metal is. And I can just kind of cut that away. You can already see that down here in the bottom is starting to fit nice and flush. Still got to work on the top, and of course the sides, as I said earlier, as it goes down, it tends to need to be cut out a little bit further. And I'm using a hard plastic mallet so I don't mess up the top of the brass inlay. Probably hard to see there, but I can see there's impressions from the brass being hammered into the wood in a couple of spots here, so I know I need to take away that area. And then, like I said, I got to take these out a little bit on the sides. Should be getting pretty close now. Try one more test fit. Don't really need the screws this time because I've got it so close. I know it's not going to shift around on me. And I still got these sides that need to come down just a little bit, and the top needs to come down. Now this is a good point where you could actually soot and press it in there like I just did and get impressions from the soot as to where you need to cut down some more. And I will probably go ahead and do that. Bend this tip down just a little bit. Okay, I've sooted the underside of this now, so we'll see how close I've gotten and how much I got to take out and where. Well, looks like mostly edgewise. I can see some down in here where I need to go down on that side a little bit, right up in here, and a little bit down here in the corners. But so far I haven't reached that level yet, so I've got to work on the edges first. Going to peel the edges a little bit, take a shaving off. Alright, starting to see a little black on the bottom now, which is what I want to see. That means it's starting to go down now. You can still see that there's a lot on the edges around here, so I need to take those down a little bit more. And you can see I got more black in there this time, so I'll take a little bit more of that out, especially on the top here. It's not quite fitting down tight on this side. Alright, I'm going to resoot this. I'm going to go ahead and screw this down to tighten it, and then I'm going to tap around the edges, see if I can't draw it in some. That's looking pretty good. Use a small hammer now, just tap around where it's poking up a little bit. So drive it in the wood. And I don't mind the metal being a little bit proud of the wood, because I've already shaped this pretty close after I did the carvings. So I don't want to take away a lot of wood in the middle here and end up with dips. I'd rather take the metal down to the wood. It's actually not doing too bad. I'll pull it out, see how it looks from the inside. Now you do want to inlet these wrist inlays after you've done your tang carving and or the comb carving, because you've got to lower this material in between to get the carving to raise up. So if you've inletted this first, it doesn't leave you much area to bring down. So always do this inlay after you've done your carving. Or at least laid out your carving. You can do the, if you're doing a shell like this, you can just do the basic outline and come back and decorate it after you've got this in. But you want to get all this wood down to the height you want first. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and take these black areas down a little bit, at least on this top side here. Also, if you're going to use glue underneath your inlay, which a lot of people do, you want to get rid of any of this soot that's in there, because that will prevent the glue from soaking into the fibers of the wood, and it will not give you a good strong bond. You'll also need to clean up the underside of the inlay. Of course, get all the soot off, but also sand it a little bit, roughen up the surface. And actually, if you do this method here, good close tolerances inletting, and you're going to use screws to hold it in, you really don't need to glue. There, I'm going to clean up the underside of mine a little bit. Just get the soot off. I got a pretty good fit now. Yeah, that's pretty good. So that'll do for now. I've got a good tight fit. If there's any little gaps, on the ends or something, you can actually go on the inside of the inlay, lay it on your anvil, and if you have a small hammer with a narrow peen like this one, you can actually move that metal over a little bit. Hammer from the inside though, so you don't have hammer marks on the outside. And you can actually stretch the brass a little bit to fill those gaps. Now to attach this, you got two things you can do. Of course, square nails are used very commonly, heads down, peened over. Countersink these holes a little bit, and that helps it hold even better. You can use the small steel nail screws, which is very common. You'll see a steel circle at either end, but that's common. You can sink it about halfway so that the screwdriver slot is still above the surface of the inlay, and then when you file everything flush, that screwdriver slot goes away and you have basically a threaded pin holding it in now. On brass inlays, I like to actually use a brass wood screw to do the same thing. I'll countersink this a little bit, put the screw in there, and I will put a little bit of super glue on them just to make sure they don't back out. And I'll screw them in all the way, hammer them lightly, and that'll help it force its way into the countersink on the inlay, and then file everything flush. So let me kind of get set up here. I got to countersink these and find my wood screws. So I'll be right back. Alright, what I'm going to do, and sometimes I do this, not always, is I've mixed up some two-part epoxy, excuse me, added a little bit of acrylic paint to it and some very fine sawdust from my belt sander. Now this will not only color it, but the sawdust in it will help any stains to color the material, the glue, around the edges if there's any gaps. Now I know it's pretty tight fit on this, so I'm really putting it more around the edges to fill any gaps I might have, which I didn't see many, but just be on the safe side. If you put too much in the center, you have a hard time getting the inlay flat again. Especially with the wood fibers in their glue, because they don't compress. Alright. Now I've also sanded the underside of the inlay so it's roughened up a bit. And we'll set that in place now. And we'll countersink these two holes a little bit. Not too much. You just want to basically have a little bit of hole there so that the inlay won't come back up again. Now we'll put in the permanent screws, which I'm using brass on these, and since they're going down through glue, they will get glued in as well. And you have to kind of work fast now because that glue is going to set up fairly quickly. It's a 5-minute epoxy. And if you use brass screws like I'm using, make sure they're solid brass, because a lot of them today are brass plated, and then basically you're just putting in steel screws. Okay, tighten those down, clean a little bit off the edges here. And this may look like a mess, but when you're finished, it'll look pretty good. And I'm going to check again, make sure my screw slots are above the level of the inlay, which they are. So that's good. Now just let this set. And once it's set, then I'll start carefully filing everything down to the surface of the wood. So, intermission time. We're going to wait for this glue to dry up. Alright, so the glue is hardened. I actually, while it was still tacky, I washed it off with a little lacquer thinner just to get the excess out of the way. Now all I got to do is start filing this all down. And I like to use a fairly wide file. Let's see if I can find one here. Yeah, this is a little bit coarse probably, but you can start off with this. Start taking those heads down. And I like the wider files so that you don't get ripples as you're working, which smaller, thinner files will do. Now I want to be careful that I don't start nicking up any of my carvings. I'm just kind of feeling along so I can tell where the edge of the metal is. If it's raised up any, you can feel it, and you need to work that area a little more. You can also watch how the color of the wood changes. Alright, I got a good portion of that smooth now with the coarse file. I'm going to get a smoother one and we'll finish this off a little bit. Work around a little bit. Make sure you don't have a ridge there where you've been filing. It's looking pretty good. I'm gonna do a little bit of sanding now and see what we come up with. Need to work a little bit more on this little point right here. It's still below wood. That's pretty much it. I'm going to work a little bit on these bridges I've got now. You just sand them down and make sure it's nice smooth transition from top to side. And there you go. Nice and tight, and you can't see those screws I put in there now. They've just blended in. If you look really close, you can see them. but once this is polished down and engraved, of course, you'll never see those. And that ought to stay in there for the life of the gun. So, try this at home. It's not that difficult. Just take your time. And until next time, I guess I'll see you later.